right, well, welcome everybody to GlugNet. For those who may not know me, my name is Stephen Ball. I am the acting president of GlugNet. Tonight, we are pleased to welcome Kevin Grossnicklaus, I hope I pronounced that correctly, who will be speaking to us on useful tools, APIs, services, and toys for every developer. A little more about GlugNet itself. We are the Greater Lansing user group for .NET developers, currently based out of Okemos, Michigan, pictured here. Our meetings are held monthly on the third Thursday, free and open to the public to attend. For more information about meetings, you can go to meetup.com/glugnet. You can see our future meetings scheduled there. We'd also like to thank our sponsors at this point, MAS Technologies, who's providing us this forum for this virtual meeting, the .NET Foundation, who helps pay some of the bills of the organization, and TechSmith, who is our normal physical hosting site. Meetups are recorded and posted to YouTube by Sam Nasser. You can find those at youtube.com/@SamNasserMVP or using this QR code on the screen. During the presentation, we ask that you please remain muted unless you are asking or answering a question from our speaker. If you are not comfortable speaking up or don't have the ability to on your current device, you can also submit questions via the chat in GoTo. I will monitor that and filter those to you, Kevin, as they come in. At the conclusion of tonight's presentation, there will be an anonymous survey for all attendees. This feedback is aggregated and sent to our speaker so he can improve this presentation as he gives it to other groups. So we really encourage you to please give us feedback, good, bad, or indifferent on tonight's presentation. In addition, GlugNet is looking to have lightning talks as part of these presentations. Tonight we did not have one, but if you are interested in giving a 10-minute talk on something, please let either Joe Kunk or myself know, and we will find a slot for you and give you the opportunity to present your talk. So in April of this year, GlugNet will officially be turning 20 years old, and Joe, our amazing speaker coordinator, has managed to contact Carl Franklin of .NET Rocks fame and other venues, you may have heard of him, to speak to us. So keep this one on the calendar. This is going to be a very special event for us. Some other events you may be interested in. Our friends in the Cleveland C# VBNet user group. Our friends at the C# VBNet group in Cleveland, they have a meetup coming up. The Greater Lansing Area for SQL Server, or GLASS, has scheduled a talk on maximizing performance with memory optimized table variables. So if that sounds of interest to you, please check it out. They're a very good group. Some additional groups that don't have meetings scheduled yet, but I would highly recommend. There's a .NET study group using the link there, or mi.net. One thing to note, they are in-person only at this point, based out of Southfield, Michigan, so they may not be accessible for everybody, but if you're in the area, check them out. And now it's time for our featured presentation.
Perfect. So I'm going to set the stage on what you're going to witness here coming tonight. This is going to be a very fast-paced talk. I want you to know that coming in. You're going to see a lot of stuff. Some of them are going to pertain directly to you. You're going to be like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. I need to take this back to my team. Other stuff, you're going to be, I'm pretty sure every individual person that's here tonight is going to think, yeah, that doesn't really affect me much. I'm going to cover a lot, and that's by design. And that's why I have my contact information up here. I'm the guy on the right. If there's questions during the talk, please post them, and I'm sure whoever is moderating will get them to me. I'll try to answer as much as I can, but we're going to cover a lot of ground, see a lot of things. It's going to range from APIs you could use, NuGet packages, NPM packages, frameworks, IDEs. There's somewhat of an ordering to it and some not of an ordering to it. As I mentioned earlier, for those of you that were on when I joined a bit ago, I've given this talk a lot. Everything that I give, so I don't want to really go too much into my particular company, but my background very quickly. I want to make sure this is a presentation and not an introduction. But my background is I'm a developer. I'm a developer since the early 80s when I was a young kid. But I've been doing this a long time. I was there when .NET was invented. I wrote a book on .NET in 2001, or VB.NET actually in 2001. Spoke at one of the first .NET user groups in the country. I don't know everything. I don't actually code as much as I used to. I've kind of moved on in my particular career, so I'm not a coder that sits here. But you're going to see stuff that I've presented, my teams use, I use. I've given this talk all over the country from coast to coast. Many of the tools that you're going to see in this or hear about in this talk are recommendations from other attendees. They're from my customers. They're not things. I don't want to come into this thinking that I am be all developer and I know all these tools are the best. You may, at the end of this talk, email me and say, hey, you should consider this as well. Please do that. It gets added to this talk. And there's way more in the queue than I could ever present in the time allotted tonight. So we're going to go very fast. Some of it's going to be high level. Some of it is going to be just a browser and a link. I'm going to, every link to everything I'm going to show tonight, I've got a document for you. So you don't have to worry too much about taking notes. If you say, hey, that tool is pretty cool, there's a document, I'll go ahead and jump right into that. My company is called Architect Now. If you go to our website, we have a resources page, the developer tool list, click download, that will take you to this document. It's, I don't know, 5 or 6 pages, but there's a lot of stuff in here. At some point, I do need to go back and add some more, maybe a sentence or two, but I don't have that right now. That's what you're going to get here in person. So I'm going to start, and I'm not going to run top down through these tonight. I know I've given this talk to at conferences that were not as heavily in the .NET space. They were more in JavaScript, TypeScript, Angular, React. They were Node. So there are tools in here that do cross into that. There are lower level tools just for time I'm going to skip over. So again, if you don't want to take notes, there's links to everything in here. And I've kind of grouped this document to have, a little bit of structure, maybe more so in structure than we have today. But again, I'm a developer. We're a big C#. I'm on one other quick caveat I will say before I get in. I got a new computer yesterday. I don't know why that matters, but it matters to you. It's honestly the largest laptop. It's the largest computer I've probably ever been in the same room with. It's huge. That said, I installed everything yesterday, so I'm anticipating there might be 1 or 2 things. I think I'm very close, but I'm also nervous. And there's probably going to be one tool that I want to demo and have it already installed that I might have forgotten. So I might just show you the webpage to that. But for most stuff, I might have everything ready to go. This computer is a M2 Max. I'm a Mac guy. My whole company are Mac people. Everything you're seeing on the screen here, if you're not familiar, is a Mac. It's an M2 Max with 96 gigs of memory. And it's like a 30 core computer. It's crazy how fast it is. But I've only had it for 24, 48 hours. So with that, let's dive in. And again, I'm going to jump around a lot. If you want to hear more about anything, email, post it in the chat. I'll try to, given the time allotted, answer as many questions as I can. But if you hear me speaking fast now, that's just me revving the engines because I'm going to go very fast and show a lot of stuff. So be prepared. My background is C# and Azure, so some of these are going to be Azure. Now let me skip past that one. And some are tool, like I said, some are tools, some are APIs. We are a big infrastructure as code in Azure. If you're not an Azure person, this is going to be less important to you, but we use Terraform. There's Pulumi. There's all kinds of different options for doing this stuff. But yeah, I think I had some of these tabs set up a little early, but whatever. I'll just go in order of the open tabs I have. I won't even ask. We're a Terraform shop that automates the generation of a bunch of our infrastructure in a tool called Terraform by a company called HashiCorp. A brief summary of what that means. Terraform has its own kind of weird language or structure of a file. We integrate Terraform with our Azure DevOps. We're an Azure DevOps shop. So our CI/CD pipelines are all Azure DevOps, and Terraform is a part of that. So when we do a deployment, as an example, many of our applications, Azure DevOps, we commit to Git, a pull request happens, C# code goes up, we're going to rebuild an API. CI/CD pipeline kicks off. It will, integrate this code. There's gates. It'll make sure it compiles. It'll make sure certain rules are applied. Ultimately, when it gets ready to deploy, it will use Terraform as part of its pipeline. It will spin up a completely new set of virtual machines, app services, Kubernetes clusters, SQL Server databases, Mongo, whatever it is. It will provision a massive amount of Azure infrastructure, deploy all of the current assets to that infrastructure, run unit tests, run integration tests, make sure everything works. On a success or failure, we'll get reports. Then it will spin everything down. So this infrastructure is only going to live long enough for tests to run. That's one example of what we use Terraform for. And we, regardless of the technology, whether you're Node or .NET, Terraform is how we have a certain pattern for how we build applications, and we have Terraform scripts that already have all the templates and everything ready to go. So when we have a new project for a customer, there's a lot of commonality. It's an API, it's a database, it's an Angular front end. We have a Terraform script that on a new project we just run, and it provisions all of our QA, our tests, and our production environments for us. And it's done in seconds. So we don't go into portal.azure.com. Terraform is our code that is all of our infrastructure. So that's what Terraform is. And there's some competitors to it. I won't say competitors, more alternatives. Like I said, Pulumi, Bicep, Azure templates. There's other things that do it. But if you've not gone down that path, you've likely heard of it, depending on the company that you're at. Some companies have adopted this process, others haven't. Again, some randomness to the order here, and I apologize. This is how the tabs have opened. But if you're still using Visual Source Safe or Subversion or anything else, you're probably behind the times. I hate to say that. But reality is Git has won the source control wars at this point. It used to be more of a religious war, people would argue. It's less argument anymore on that particular thing. We've moved on to other arguments, but I am not as good at Git personally, command line, as my team. I work with a bunch of people that are experts, that are some of the best I've ever seen. They teach classes and they do all this. I'm not one of those people. I still kind of like to have a tool handy that's visual that I can see. I use SourceTree as one that I'll talk about here in a little bit. GitKraken is another one that some of my team uses. I always like to have something that I can just open and run. Postman. Many of you, there was a time when I gave this talk where this was something no one had ever seen. They were like, wow, I didn't realize Postman was a thing. Anymore, Postman is one of the first things most of my developers put on their desktops or laptops or whatever they might be using. Postman is a desktop tool. There's a commercial version. You can pay for it. It's free. I will also, as a caveat, as we go today, to kind of talk about what's free and what's not. I won't get into pricing because it changes all the time. But if I point out something that does have a cost to it, I will call that out. I use the free Postman. We do not pay for Postman at my company, but every single employee at my company has Postman loaded on the machine. Postman is a tool for calling APIs. We live in an API-centric world. Postman allows me to queue up all my tests. We have customers. Many of our customers anymore have Postman as well. When we do a deployment, if they're able to find a bug, we have a lot of projects that aren't necessarily front-end focused. We build APIs for people. We're building, our development cycle ends at the API, and the documentation for that API. We'll come back to Swagger and Open API later, but they have customers that will send us Postman scripts to say, hey, we found a bug. Here's a Postman script that can replicate the bug. We will load that script into Postman, and we can just immediately execute it, and we will see exactly what they're saying. So Postman is a critical part of all of our development, regardless of whether you're C#, Node, Go, Rust, whatever your language is. Postman is going to be useful. It speaks HTTP for calling APIs. And I have a lot. Postman is one of the tools I do not have installed on this box already. But again, I've only had it for 24 hours. We are an Azure shop. If you're an Azure shop, most people assume everything you do in the cloud has to be done via browser. That's not necessarily the case. I use Azure Storage Explorer pretty heavily, day in and day out, to access all of my hard drives. This is it. I just switched to it, Azure Storage Explorer. If I want to see all my storage accounts, I can see my hard drives. I can see my blob storage, my file storage, everything. We've got a ton of stuff in Azure. Some of these are like blob containers. I don't know if there's any in here. I just picked one. I'm on a Mac. Azure Storage Explorer works on Windows as well. Again, much like I will briefly explain, this is commercial or this is free, whatever. I will also say this is Mac or Windows. I'm happen to giving this talk on a Mac, but this is also a Windows application. It's cross-platform. So Azure Storage Explorer, if you're working somewhere where Azure is a key part of your architecture, this gives you access to a lot of the backend stuff through a thick client where you can upload files, download files, see things. Along the same lines, there's a similar tool called Azure Data Studio. If you're on Windows and you're a SQL Server shop, you would likely use SQL Server Management Studio to remotely, whether it's a local SQL Server in your network or whether it's out in Azure, you'd use SQL Server Management Studio. Azure Data Studio is what that is being called moving forward. Not Management Studio is not getting renamed, but this would be an alternative. It works just like SQL Management Studio, and it's going to be on a Mac or cross-platform if you need to do it. You can connect to any kinds of databases and execute queries, and you can version control your scripts, do things of that nature in this tool. Now we're moving into things that kind of go together a little more. Those were kind of weird tabs up front. I just didn't want to jump around. We have a lot of customers. We build big products for people. We have a lot of customers that have localization needs, meaning that it's not all English. We don't live in a world that's all English. So they have certain subsets of their user base that are all around the world. And those people want content, but they want to see their applications or they want to see data in different languages. We've had great success with a tool called Localize. It integrates with our CI/CD pipeline. We do all of this is commercial. There's pricing to it, but it has a full API. We tokenize everything and we pull down the English version of something or the Spanish version, whatever it is. We pay them a fee every month, and our customers range from startups, and one of the biggest customers we have that uses Localize for a lot of their mobile apps is Walmart. They're the biggest companies in the world, and they use Localize for a lot of their mobile apps that we've integrated into their pipelines. So Localize is a localization platform. We reach out and it's part of our CI/CD, so stuff gets replaced. It's not that our apps are calling this in real time, but we have builds that use this as part of that and integrate all the different content. What was this? Browser Stack. We've used Browser Stack for many, many years. I would guess 7, 8 years we've used Browser Stack. We use Browser Stack for testing web or mobile applications on actual devices. And it seems weird that it's a browser-based tool, but Browser Stack is kind of unique. They have a massive amount of take mobile devices. If you've ever built a native app, an Android or iOS, it's very tricky. iOS is a little more standard. Don't get me wrong; it's got its own issues. But when you get into Android, Google Pixels and all the different form factors and tablets, and it's a wild west. It's hard to actually own all those things to make sure that it looks right or does right. If you come into Browser Stack, they actually have labs of these things connected to the internet where you can deploy code onto a physical device and then remote, kind of, for lack of a better term, remote desktop into those devices and see and touch it on a browser. So I have testers today that have been logging into Browser Stack that are running full native apps and testing them on multitude of devices. Now, I don't want to say we test every app on every device. There's too many. But when a customer comes back with a bug and says, hey, I got somebody in South America that is using a Google Pixel X and this particular thing doesn't look right, we can log into Browser Stack, find that device, and they have so many of them. Same thing with browsers. We still, maybe some of you do, maybe some of you don't, go a long way back in browser. Here's all the different devices they have. Sorry, it opened up. It took me a minute. But here's the Android devices that they have physically in there. There's, I don't know, 100. It doesn't go back forever. iOS, this is what they have. So you're able to just, if I needed an iPad Air 2019 with, I could spin one up. But when you come down to browsers, interactive cross-browser testing, if I wanted to test, and first thing comes to mind is always your company's website. It's going to make me enter this. It knows I'm a customer. Never mind. But, sorry. When you get into browsers, if you need to test Internet Explorer 11 or whatever number they died at. On a Windows 8 machine, you could do that. And they have Windows 8 machines with that in the cloud. So you can test anything you want in Browser Stack. They're a pretty cool tool. Don't want to spend too much time on it, but that's what they do. If you've got the need for it, they also price month to month. And I'm not promoting doing this, but we have went 6 months without using them, so we just turned off our account and then just turned it on for a month if we needed it. And then now we're kind of in a phase where we've used it solid for a year, but there were times 5 or 6 years ago we didn't use it, we turned it off. Hate to say that's a good idea, but it is what it is. If you're into just watching Michigan State football and you only need the Big Ten network for a little bit, you can turn on Hulu for a little bit. But next, 1Password. We use this religiously. Not a development tool per se, but I do bring it up and I do encourage using it. Like I mentioned earlier, we are a bunch of development teams. So I've got a whole bunch of 7, 8, 9 person development teams that are building large projects for customers. We follow Microsoft's zero trust security policy. I don't want any customer to ever give my teams access to any production data. We fight against it. We accidentally get production data. We almost get lawyers involved and say, you should have never sent us this. It seems weird, but it has worked gloriously. As new developers, testers, whoever come onto projects, there are QA and test environments. They need access to passwords. We use 1Password. We have a corporate account. We have vaults for each customer, and a vault is just a collection of usernames, passwords, secure data, whatever it might be. New person comes on board, they're granted access to a vault. They have access to get those passwords only as much as they need. If for whatever reason they should leave our organization, we remove access to that vault. They no longer have access to those passwords, right? We know what's controlled. None of those vaults ever have production data, or if they are, it's controlled to a very small number of people. But there are other people like 1Password. We've had great luck with these guys. Again, these opened in a weird order. I didn't notice that when I reopened everything. Typically, they're more ordered. This is, it's not theme. The next one should be Theme Forest. Template Monster, this is Theme Forest. Or as one of my companies called it, the Me Forest. It does look like the Me Forest. I had a customer call it that for years. And at some point, I felt sorry laughing at him, and I felt like I should tell him it's actually theme. We build large Angular applications. We build React applications. We build websites. My company is not, and maybe some of you do work for marketing firms or design firms where you have designers that sit around who are, really focused on fonts and colors and transitions and usability. We do that, don't get me wrong, but that's not our core focus. A lot of what we build is enterprise type applications. So I come into Theme Forest when we start an application. We go to HTML, admin templates. I'm just going to pick one randomly. Let's find something that looks cool. Look at this application. It looks cool. I've got navigation down the left. It expands. It's got certain pages. It's got some styles in here. If I wanted something that looked like this, if I needed, why this keeps popping up, you can get down into data entry, get into components and certain, the look and feel of this, it looks professional, right? If you saw this, if you logged in, it keeps popping this up. I don't know. If you logged in, this wouldn't look bad. What Theme Forest is, it's basically a e-commerce site for people that want to buy these themes. What does it mean when you buy them? They give you a zip file with every CSS, all the styles, everything that looks just like this. This particular one is built with Angular. It gives you all the Angular 13, the most modern Angular, React. You can run it with anything. They kind of tell you it. They will give you starter kits. So we start a lot of projects. For a point last year, we had 4 projects at the same time that were using the same theme. They were completely different industries, completely different markets. Customers just like, hey, that looks really cool. I would do that, but why don't we make it look like that? These are also mobile friendly, or they tell you if they're mobile friendly. Most of them are anymore in 2013. So you also get a fully responsive mobile template if that's what you're looking for. If I wanted to come in here and go to, DevTools, I could do that and see how this might look if I was on a mobile device, right? This is what this is going to look like on a mobile device. So you get the layout. Now, is your app going to look exactly like this? No. If you're, modern development shop, you would adjust all these color styles, logos, make it look like you. It would actually be your business app, but you can go pretty far by starting with the template instead of reinventing the wheel. Most of my customers want functionality. They don't want to spend a lot of time. They want it to look pretty, but when you tell them how much it would cost to hire a designer to design it from scratch, they don't want to do that. If I tell them I could spend 50 or 100 or $300 and buy one of these, they're like, great, that looks awesome. I will do that. So there's that. Template Monster is another one that does the same thing. Some of these, if you're a WordPress shop, they're pre-built. Other ones, we don't use any of the WordPress stuff. We use straight HTML or stuff that's pre-built for Angular or whatnot. Same for email. There's a science to building. When you have an application that sends emails, how do you design email? Most people just do white with some text. If you're fortunate enough, you have designers and they will give you the layout in HTML that looks good in all different mobile or browser-based or thick client email clients. There are some great sites out there. This is one of them called Zerb. We download a lot of their nice, basic, clean email templates, and this gives us the nice layout for something like this. They've tested it across every, if I want something like this is an email. They've tested this. We replace some of the stuff. Obviously, it gives us some HTML. We can regenerate in our own code, but they've tested it on Google or on Gmail, on Outlook.com, varying iPhone and Android email clients, and it looks good and it has some structure and some nice fonts to it. So we make ourselves look cool by starting with something like this. And we replace all these images, tells us what they're going to be, and they resize. So we do that. Built with. I pay Built with. I'm a Built with subscriber. Microsoft uses Built with. I learned about this from Microsoft up at Redmond in a marketing event. I was up there for once. Built with tells you, it's not a developer tool, but I do like to point it out in this talk, and I'll run through it briefly. Built with tells me that, and again, I'm using my own. I just say, you enter any URL in Built with. Think of Built with like Google, but for the technology behind a website. They don't show you the website. They say that architectnow.net uses all of these different things. We're using Google Tag Manager. It's built with Angular. Angular 8.2 is our current version. Viewport, we use Cosmic JS is our I'll talk about Cosmic later. Webpack. I mean, it lists all of these technologies because it went out and they, much like Google browses, Google will go have a spider that hits all these URLs, gather content and give you search terms. Built with does something similar at scale. But what Built with does is it doesn't care about what your website looks like. They grab all your headers, they grab all your JavaScript files, all your includes. They look at everything at a script level and tell you, they look at your DNS and they can tell you everything about what technologies are behind that particular website. So if you have a competitor, you have something you really like and you're like, hey, that site looks good, I want to figure out how they did it, just go to builtwith.com, enter the URL. They've got it indexed already and you can learn a lot about how they do it. I use Built with. If you pay, when I say I pay, we use them as part of our marketing. You can get into details and meta. I pay a certain amount of money. I don't know if I pay that, but you're able to go to Built with. You say, I want every company in the world that's using Angular JS, the older version of Angular, and they will sell you it kind of in a marketing. They also sell you this data. Swagger. If you're building APIs and not using Swagger, you're probably doing it wrong. Swagger is built into all .NET anymore. It just comes out of the box. If you spin up a new .NET API, Swagger is going to be turned on. It's also called Open API. So if you go to Open API, not AI, not ChatGPT, maybe we'll talk about that later. The Open API initiative is basically how people document and write API, not to say write APIs, but how they document APIs. So we use Swagger for all of our API documentation. And again, you'd almost anymore, there was a different time, but you'd almost have to turn it off. There was a time when I started giving this talk a number of years ago where it was newer to people and people had to figure out how to use it. Now it's old hat and people don't even realize it's called Swagger. Now it's just Open API and it's turned on by default. So if you're not using Swagger and APIs are your thing, whether or not you're publishing those APIs to the public, selling them to businesses, or just you're a front-end team or you're a back-end team that's publishing APIs to a front-end team in your own company, it's all internal. Swagger is going to make your life easy. There's a whole tool ecosystem around Swagger. You could generate code. You can generate all your client-side proxies. If you're on Xamarin, if you're on anything else, so Swagger is a great tool for that. Electron. Electron it's a Electron is what Visual Studio Code is written in. Electron is what Teams is written in. Electron is in what all kinds of different applications. Slack is written in Electron. So what Electron is it allows you to use web-based technologies, React, Angular, things of that nature, and build and publish your applications as desktop apps, cross-platform desktop apps. So if you build Visual Studio Code, is one of the most installed applications that or development applications that Microsoft has ever done. If you're familiar with Visual Studio Code, it's written in React and it's wrapped in Electron. So they're able to have one build, one platform, all of the IDE, everything. And when they compile it, it installs on Linux, Mac, and Windows. And it even runs in a browser. So there's Visual Studio Code in a browser now. So if you want to build a native desktop application, one option would be to use what Microsoft has technology to do that, the old WPF, things of that nature. If you're on a Mac, there's things you could do on a Mac to build a Mac app, but you're building native to that platform. Electron allows you to build once and deploy everywhere. And it wraps, not only it wraps your JavaScript, HTML, and CSS as it says here, but it also gives you access to the local hard drive file systems to build a native app, right? Things that you would expect to have, that it's not isolated like the sandbox of a browser. So Electron allows you to do that. I use this all the time as a .NET developer, QuickType. There's a lot of times people give me JSON or some type of JSON, and I need to make a class. So I paste that JSON in over here. I keep this up. It's in my shortcuts. I paste it, and it writes a .NET or a TypeScript or Swift or anything. If I need a C# wrapper, if I have just this, I have greeting and instructions, and greeting is a single string and instructions has an array of strings. It will write me something, with the class name, and it will have welcome as a string, or it has all the converter. Where am I at here? Kind of looks funny as how it does it in this one, but it's this class, single string, and an array of strings. You can adjust some of how it does it. If you want a generic list, it'll convert everything to a generic list instead of arrays or whatnot. So you don't have to do some of the stuff, make them all optional. It'll do null handling. But I use this quite a bit. If somebody says, hey, I need an API that converts this, I will make all my models with QuickType if something else doesn't generate it for me. Prettier, again, I'm going fast. Please bear with me. There's going to be all kinds of random stuff here, and I'll get through a lot more here. But Prettier is a tool we just use as part of our IDE. There was a time when I used to argue with my developers, I like this style, and it was always a religious war. I want brackets. I want curly brackets at the end of the line, not at the first of the next line, or whatever it might be. Prettier does that all for us now. Every time you hit save on a file in Visual Studio Code or Writer, WebStorm, we'll talk about IDEs in a little bit, they automatically have Prettier that formats the code based on a set of rules. So there's nobody at my company that gets to specify their own rules. They're dictated at a global level by your team, and Prettier just makes it happen on a save. So you can code all you want as fast as you want, boom, save, Prettier does it. So if you're used to Visual Studio or other tools doing it, it's likely Prettier behind the scenes. Algolia is an API for searching. Instead of the more traditional concept people think about is you have a database, and your database has some structure to it, NoSQL or SQL. You got some relationships, you got invoices, you got line items, you got people, whatever. You need to search that data. You write a select query, and you join, or you do whatever. That is slow. And I will bring up databases later, but not a big fan of relational databases. I've kind of moved my mindset into document databases for speed. Relational databases are very slow. What Algolia does is it offloads all your searching. So there's a trick to it. The only way it works is you have to send them the data you want to search. So they keep their own copy of it, and they index it. What kind of stuff does Algolia do? This is a sample, the URL preview.algolia.com, instant search. If you're going to build something that's scaled, it's an instantaneous search. They do stuff like that. You'd see this on like bestbuy.com or Amazon or homedepot.com, where you're searching. This is more of a consumer, find things, and then I want this, and all of a sudden that I want, only 3 stars or up, or 4 stars, or whatever they have here. This is an instantaneous search. The search is actually going from the browser in JavaScript back to Algolia. They've already got the indexes pre-built, and they're doing it that way. We've used Algolia in a bunch of projects now. There's a lot of different, now Azure has a few, Azure Search, and there's Elasticsearch and things of that nature. Algolia competes with them, but is more commercial and has a lot more stuff. If I'm typing and I want Belkin and I miswrite it, notice I put two Ks up here. It will fix your spelling and find things that are close. It does all of that for you. So we've used Algolia. It's a commercial product. You pay for it. It's an API. Once you get into the framework of it, it's actually pretty cool. My team loves it. Mailgun is a competitor to SendGrid. SendGrid is owned by Twilio. They both are SMTP email servers. They're APIs for sending email at scale. I prefer, and goes back and forth on some of my teams. Some of my customers prefer SendGrid. I prefer Mailgun. It does more than send emails. Mailgun has webhook APIs. It will do your open pixels. I get full stats. It has a full API for notifying me on open, on send, on bounce. When we build large applications where email is a critical part of that application, Mailgun, its SDKs and the APIs that it provides gives us a lot more capabilities than just a send. Here's an email, go send it to this email address and hope it gets there. There's a lot more to it in Mailgun that you would expect to see on really high-end applications. So SendGrid does some of these as well, but I have Twilio next. Twilio, their email component is SendGrid. They bought SendGrid a number of years ago. Twilio goes beyond just email, though. Twilio does our SMS, our texting, you can build a full VoIP. Twilio is a complete communications API. It's commercial. You pay for it. But if you really wanted to build something to send emails or text at scale, Twilio would be one of the number one things I would point you at. You could send text for pennies, fractions of a cent. We have a lot of customers that are like, hey, when this happens, don't just email them, send them a text. We use Twilio to do that. It seems, and it could be 2 lines of code. If you're not familiar with doing that kind of stuff, it's much easier than you think. They do full programmable voice systems. They'll automate voice. They'll do marketing campaigns. They do all kinds of crazy stuff. It's nuts what Twilio can allow you to do if communication, messaging, and things of that nature is what you want to do, or you're building for your customers. Cosmic.js is a tool it's a headless CRM. You noticed earlier when I was on Built With, we use it for our website, use it for customer websites. We've actually moved off this. There's a new one now called Strappy, but they're both very similar. Cosmic.js is a headless CMS. I go into it, I define objects, I give it titles and HTML or upload files. Our Angular websites or React websites reach out to Cosmic in its API. We pull down the content that we render. So customers, I can, their security roles, I can give access to customers to come in here and add content. Say they want to update text in their homepage. They log into Cosmic and update the homepage text. Our app reads it from Cosmic. So we give them full CRM CMS capabilities, and Cosmic is the engine. So they're going back and forth to Cosmic and adding events or things like that. And so this is where you get the hybrid of a fully custom application and something like a WordPress. WordPress is a CMS, but it has the front end included. You get the HTML and the styles and the themes on the front end. Cosmic has no front end. It's simply an API. Strappy, is the competitor. We switched to Strappy. Same thing. Cosmic we pay for. Strappy is a Docker image. We host our own Strappy instances in the cloud, and we hit them. So it does kind of the same thing. Strappy is a fully Dockerized open source. There is a commercial version. We use the open source one. Headless CRM. Our customers log in here and manage pieces of our custom applications that we want them to manage. And then when we render those UIs, we're reading from a REST API that Strappy generates. And it's very cool. Some very nice SDKs. This is the current one we use. We started to transition customers from Cosmic to Strappy. Ably. Now I'm kind of in a phase here of APIs. Ably is SignalR at scale. If you're familiar with SignalR, it's kind of a real-time open sockets back from client to server or different devices and pump data and subscribe to events. Ably does that. We use Ably for if you're on Facebook or Twitter and somebody, say you're on Facebook, for example, and somebody likes one of your pictures, you see the little immediately in real time in your browser, you see the little bubble pop up and say a red one that there's been somebody that liked one of your things. Ably allows different browsers. I can have 1,000 users out there. From JavaScript, I can also subscribe to an Ably channel. and one of them can post a message and they all get notified of that message in real time. So my customers all around the world, if I have the need, the server side, somebody calls an API and saves some data. As soon as I save that data successfully, I can publish to an Ably channel that this data was updated, and then all other browsers can refresh or get access to that data. So Ably is pretty cool for building real-time interconnected web applications that would be difficult. Pusher is a competitor. Pusher and Ably do the exact same thing. They're slightly different. I prefer Ably, but they do the exact same thing. If I'm in here and writing, they don't even have C# in here. They have C# somewhere because I've written Pusher stuff, but they are pub sub, kind of subscribe to a channel, get notified on a channel from JavaScript, from the server, from any language you want. If you've got thousands of users that need updated, we've used these for Walmart, where the executives have a dashboard and somebody needs, every time some data happens, the dashboard needs to refresh. We're pumping dashboard updates back down through an Ably type deal. So dashboard is moving in real time, regardless of where the data in the world is happening. These guys I used years ago. I haven't used recently, but I bring them up because they're kind of interesting. They're lob.com. They're the craziest API to describe. They are a company that does print. They do address verifications, or they print stuff. If you have a image that is a postcard and you want that sent, you could put tags on it. You can give them a JPEG. You can call their API, give them the image and give them the tags. They will physically put it in the mail and mail it. It's kind of weird to say, but that's how it works. If you have a letter, say you're sending a receipt or an invoice for something, they will print your letter threefold. They have a machine that will threefold it, put a stamp on it, and send it. So you pay for it, but they're a full mail integration API. Print delivery network, they do direct mail, which is crazy for people to see. But they will automate direct, and there's companies where direct mail is a thing. Lots of people do this still. Some people don't, but they create a scalable direct mail. So you pay, one API call might be $1, right? So you can do small businesses and they'll let you send these things in the physical mail. So I bring them up. We've used those and helped customers save money. Stripe, if you're managing your own credit card data and you're not using a Stripe or a Braintree or PayPal or something, you're doing it wrong. Stripe is our go-to. It's more than credit card processing. We use Stripe for ACHs, bank transfers, all kinds of stuff. Anything financial, we use Stripe. That's the API that we go to. I'm not really going to cover these. I'm going to skip through some of these just to keep on. There's a Sneak is a API, or it's a security vulnerability testing tool. I'm going to start to skip through a few here just to keep us on track. 12-factor apps. We talk about this a lot in other talks, but if you've seen me speak at conferences, it's probably been on Azure, things of that nature. We're a big fan of 12-factor applications. It's not an API. It's not a tool. It's not a NuGet package. This is a concept. It is a best practice for writing applications. 12 factors of how you do it. If you read through this, it's kind of like reading the old design patterns book. It's very enlightening. People come here and they read this and they're like, that's why .NET does it this way. This is how I should be building apps. So it's the Heroku guy put this together. Well worth looking at that, especially as a team. Trunk-based development, kind of like GitFlow, is a pattern for, it's not a tool. Again, it's not a technology. It's not an API that you use. There's no cost to it. It's something that you should understand. There's a few patterns like this. This is one option. We like this option. Trunk-based development is a method and a pattern for development teams to collaborate in Git. So this is how production software is written. This is how you do hot fixes, releases. Git is more than just a source control. Obviously there's branching and there's, remote repositories and local repositories and all of this. And that makes sense to some people, not to others. So yes, you can use it in a rudimentary fashion, but if you really understand it and follow a pattern like this, your team is going to be better off and you're going to write better and more robust software. So this is more of a concept, well worth the read, links included. Miro is one of the biggest tools, and honestly, in my particular company, I believe, and I'm likely the guy that pays for it. We spend more money on Miro every month than any other tool. Miro, when COVID hit, we had just started using Miro. It became a very critical piece to our development process. Not a development tool, it's a virtual whiteboard collaboration tool. Seems silly. There are other options to it. We love this one. Our teams, we do our stand-ups, our sprint reviews, all of our ceremonies. Miro manages them. Our customers are in Miro with us. Our sales process, we open Miro boards. It integrates with Teams. Miro is a big part of what we do as a development shop. It does not integrate with our IDEs or any of that. It doesn't write code for us, but it is a very important tool that everybody, the day one when you start up my company, you get into Miro, you get access to Miro boards, and you're watching us go through that. Lucid Charts is a competitor to Miro. Not as much as more charting and prototyping, but I have it up here. Cypress.io is a browser-based testing tool. We do automated testing of our Angular apps in Cypress. It became pretty popular lately. You see a lot more people using it. We started pretty early, didn't know a lot of people that used it, but now our testers can write their scripts here in the side. You see my cursor moving around, and they can play them back and test React and Angular apps and automate. We version a lot of the stuff, and we play it back in those Terraform-generated applications. Mockaroo, I talk about Mockaroo a lot. Mockaroo.com. Mockaroo is a tool we've used for many years. We have a lot of young developers at my company, and they're great at what they do. They come out of college, they know all these cool hip technologies, and they're talented and they're passionate. But what they don't have is the miles behind them that I do. And what I find is a lot of times they take things for granted that I didn't, because I grew up when computers were slow, databases were slow. We didn't have the horsepower. We didn't have this. We didn't have that. And database size is one of those assumptions. They'll build a grid. They just do a select star from a database, maybe not that, but you get the point. And it works great when they have Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse are the only two rows in the database. It doesn't work great when you put 1 million or 1 billion rows in that database, because their select star kills everything. So what we do as part of our development process is when we start very early on, the early sprints, when we are doing database design, we're getting the initial structures in place. We will use Mockaroo to generate dummy data. You can come into Mockaroo and it will generate any kind of data you want. Animal names, airport names, latitudes, longitudes, continents, random version numbers, fake app names, any of this. You just give it some columns and it'll generate spreadsheets of it. We will generate hundreds of thousands of rows. So within 1 or 2 sprints of starting an application, by the time we've got some initial structures in place for whatever data structures we might need, we will put hundreds of thousands of rows in there, which forces even the youngest or the newest developers to our industry to think about that, because their features aren't going to work when hundreds of thousands of rows are coming back. And they've matured very quickly when that's the case. But Mockaroo is pretty there. You could generate a certain amount for free. The more you want to generate, I think there is a commercial version. Mailtrap. Mailtrap is another go-to application that we use religiously. We pay for it. There's a competitor to it called, next one is MailHog. Mailtrap, how many of you have written applications that people log into, or you need emails, and it sends emails, and it periodically in tests somebody forgets and an actual test email goes to an end user? We don't want that to happen, but we want to test the email sending and receiving and opening and see how it works and what goes into an email. So we pay for Mailtrap, and Mailtrap is our SMTP server in dev and QA. So all of our development environments and all of our QA environments send their emails. If the application sends an email, it goes through and sends, but it goes to Mailtrap. We can log into Mailtrap, and it's basically a team inbox. Everyone on the team can see these shared inboxes. It doesn't matter what email address you send to, it gets caught by Mailtrap. We can open the resulting email in Mailtrap, see its spam rating, see how it looks on different devices, but it never goes to the end user. So we can use production emails, but Mailtrap captures them before they go to the end user. It's changed how we think. It's kept us from a lot of embarrassing headaches. But we use Mailtrap pretty religiously. Their competitor is MailHog. This is a open source Docker image. Does the same thing, but you have to host it yourself. You have to pay for it, be somewhere. We've used both. My team generally likes Mailtrap. Hangfire, if you're a .NET, and I assume everyone here on this call is a .NET person, Hangfire is our fire and forget recurring job. It's a .NET NuGet package. There's a commercial version. There's a free version. That we do all of our fire and forget stuff on the server. An API that needs to delay something or can do a webhook on a background thread, things of that nature, we've had great luck using Hangfire to do those things. It'll batch jobs. You can get a persistent SQL or Mongo or a data store in the back end. It'll queue things up. We love Hangfire. Serilog is our go-to logging. It just replaces the .NET. We still use the interfaces for .NET logging and ASP.NET or the APIs .NET Standard, but it all runs through Serilog, and we create Serilog syncs that go out to App Insights or various logging infrastructure. But we replace the built-in .NET logger with Serilog. The rest of our application somewhat looks the same. You don't actually reference Serilog anywhere but startup, but we love it. We use AutoFac. We replace .NET's dependency injection container with AutoFac, and we love AutoFac. Poly, and again, some of these I'll run through here at the end. Poly is Poly is kind of a more complex thing to explain, but it does compile time injection. It'll replace all of your property. You can use it for all kinds of stuff. Do I have an example here? It has policies. One will be retry policies. Trying to think of a better example. One of the examples, if you have a basic .NET property, back when we did more XAML, Xamarin, if you're doing XAML data binding, you need to implement notify property changed, and every time somebody sets a property, you have to raise an event. With Poly, it'll automatically create that event. When you compile your code, you don't have to add it to your source code, but every time you compile, it'll inject all that stuff. So Poly actually changes your code at compile time, which is kind of weird, but once you get used to it, they've got resiliency. You add all these policies, and it will, every time you make an API call, it'll add a retry. It'll do all of this, or it'll cache your property calls. It'll do all kinds of crazy stuff for you. We use Poly in certain scenarios, not all the time, but we do use it. Mediator, Jimmy Bogard. Mediator's a internal messaging infrastructure. We use Mediator in a lot of projects. Again, don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole on some of these, but it's a very cool architecture for inter-process messaging. We've used these guys. I've included these recently. They're a commercial company. You buy their products, but they have Iron Excel. They have more than just that. They have Iron PDF, Excel, OCR, and barcode. They're a very polished, actually. My team actually really dug them. We've used their Excel version. If you need to generate with no Office interop, if you need to generate Excel spreadsheets or PDF, the other one, they will. They're as simple as you could ever generate. Very polished Excel spreadsheets. We've had customers recently that had some very advanced spreadsheet generation requirements. This tool, we paid for it, but worked pretty well. And the team loved it. They're like, wow, that was much easier than we thought it'd be. We use handlebar.net as a NuGet package, handlebars.net. This generates the tagging for all of our emails. If we're generating fancy emails or other content texts, it is your standard handlebars that will do all of the replacement. You can give it any string, give it a .NET class, and it'll merge the two together, and it'll replace down here with handlebars. You see this similar thing in Node, but it's a very common template generation engine using the handlebar format. AutoMapper, if you need to map to, again, Jimmy Bogard, weirdly, he's in here twice, but if you need to map to disparate .NET objects, properties, you can create mappings, and AutoMapper will map them for you. What do I mean by mapping? It'll assign first name to first name, last name to last name if it's the property names are the same. You can get more complex than that. You can have a full name property and create a custom mapper that will take first name space last name from another object. But rather than write this manually by yourself, this thing uses reflection and pre-builds these mappers and executes them at scale. Fluent validation, we do this in all of our .NET applications. We'll create a class, customer, for example. Then when I say .NET applications, I really meant to say is be a little bit more specific. We do this on our APIs. So when somebody sends an object into an API, we have a Fluent validation rule set that we've set up that you have to have a surname. It can't be empty. You have to have a forename with a message. The discount can't equal 0 when it has discount as true, things of that nature. And then before it ever even hits the first line of our code in that API, Fluent Validator will run this validation, say, hey, one or more rules failed. It'll return a nicely formatted message back to the caller. So we use point validation quite a bit in our APIs. Okay, done with tools for a minute. Azure services. I give a lot of talks on Azure. We're a Microsoft CSP. We host a lot of Azure for people. We help people manage and we provide managed services. So we spend a lot of time talking about what Azure is. And Azure's a lot of things. So when people really get into it, when I talk about it, this is a great AzureCharts.com. This is a great site that will let you visualize everything Azure. So what do these colors mean? These are just groupings, things that kind of go together. App services, Azure batch function, Azure functions, cloud services, container apps, they all kind of are more on the development side. These guys, Data Factory, Event Hubs, these are more low code. You can slice and dice this. Databases are all colored red. These are all the database options. You can click any one of these and it'll take you right to the documentation. You can slice this and you can see, look at this by anything, the new things, what regions. If you wanted to slice Azure by different regions and see what's in Central, it'll stack them. These are the Azure Compute. These are analytics. A great way to see what's new. Or if you're looking at building you can come in here and find different solutions, identity, development. All of these are just different views of the same Azure Stack data. It'll get you right to the documentation, how frequently it's updated, what's new, what's old. Great way of looking at Azure. Talk about caching. I'll skip through some of that today just because we're running late. Azure Cache for Redis. I'm a big proponent of caching. People don't cache enough. Azure Pricing Calculator. If you've used Azure at all, you're familiar with this tool or you've seen variations of it. We spend a lot of time in here. It's evolved quite a bit. I mean, it's not the be-all, end-all. You still kind of have to understand what's going on behind the scenes, but you can build out some scenarios, some sample scenarios. It'll give you, if you need to do CI/CD for Azure Web Apps, you can add this estimate and it'll set up all the different things that you would need to add. You can save estimates. You can add markup estimates. You can do whatever. That is just an application I have running. Another couple things to skip out of just being in the browser forever. People ask all the time, I know we get into IDEs, Visual Studio Code I talked about earlier. This is actually written. I mentioned Electron. This is Electron. Can't tell it's Electron. It looks like it's a native app and I'm clicking around, but yes, this is all in React and it's all in Electron. If you're on a Raspberry Pi, you would see the same code running. If you're on a Windows machine, you're seeing the same code running. It's all Electron. But we do have some developers use Visual Studio Code. Most of our developers, and I get asked this a lot, we run on Macs. We still are .NET developers, but most of our developers we have 35, 40 employees at the company. I would guess 34 or 39, all but one or two use Writer for their Visual Studio. This is a commercial tool. I have no ties to them. I don't make anything. I'm not getting a commission, but my company prefers JetBrains development tools. So we pay for these tools. This is Writer. We do all of our C# development. We do all of our Docker. We do all of our SQL entity framework. We do our Angular. Writer is their C#. The way JetBrains works is they have multiple tools per language. So Writer is the C# development tool. They have a tool called WebStorm, which looks the same, but the plugins it comes with, the layout it comes with, the stuff that it comes with is more TypeScript, JavaScript. This is where you would do your front end. So typically, our developers day to day would have WebStorm running an Angular front end, and they would have Writer, an instance of Writer like I do here, WebStorm down here, Writer over here. I don't have them connected right now, but they would be doing the front end in WebStorm, the back end in Writer, and just have them both running and debugging would be our general development process. I told you earlier about source tree. This is me not knowing Git as well. I do know Git. Don't get me wrong, I'm not that much of a newbie, but I'm not as strong as others, and I do like to come down and look at files and look at changes and look at merge requests and pull requests and see my remotes and do all of that. So I like to visualize things, and I like having tools like Gitkraken or this. What else? Docker. We're a big Docker containerized shop. The reason I got a computer here with a lot of memory, I again just installed it, so I don't have a lot of containers, but typically I would have a lot more than this, and over the coming months this will grow. But I have containers loaded. Docker Desktop is their commercial tool for visualizing all the containers you have running. I have Docker, that's JetBrains Toolbox. I have Docker. It does not show for some reason up here. We also like the old Kitematic. This is no longer available on Docker's website. Kitematic is listed in our thing. There's Docker, they published it open source in GitHub. So under Docker's official GitHub, Kitematic, and there's a link to just download it. They're trying to get you to use their commercial version, but they didn't want to. You can just get Kitematic instead. My team prefers Kitematic. It allows us, if I want to use Redis Cache or Mongo or SQL Server on a Mac, anything, I just have a container spun up and ports mapped, and I can basically turn on or off whatever I want, save memory. So we are a big containerized environment. So eats up memory, but it works pretty well. A few other things here, and I'll start to wrap up and take whatever questions. I haven't even paused at all. I know I'm talking fast and hitting tons of random things and skipping over a lot, but another big thing that's became a huge part of our process day in and day out is Azure VDI, their virtual desktop. So I have, let me go back. I get a URL. I have client windowsvirtualdesktop.com. I get this now. It knows I'm logged in as me, my architect now, my company corporate account, and I have a session desktop. I can click on this. It takes me right to a full Azure browser-based virtual desktop. This is Windows 11. If you're new to Windows 11, so I have all my teams. I have everything preloaded on here. We do this for testing. We have VDIs for different things, as opposed to running parallels or something locally. I run day to day. I don't code as much. And when I'm traveling, which I do a significant amount, I take an iPad. I got a 12-inch iPad. I have a link to this on my iPad. I'm able to click a button and open up and run Windows. If I need to get to Writer or code or do something, Power BI only runs, if I'm editing Power BI, it only runs on Windows. So I have to have it all here. So if I need Windows, even though I'm on a Mac, it's all browser based. I could also just download the RDP file and open it up in whatever RDP Windows Remote Desktop client I wanted, and I can manage all of my remote virtual environments. So I have a lot of people on my team that have full development environments all set up in their own VDIs with all their own dedicated hard drives and with all their own Git repos, and they just open up Windows and they're able to code on Windows or Mac or whatever they want to do. Let me go back. I talked Azure Bicep. I didn't open all of these. I was just kind of thinking. Another thing, who knew in 2023 we would spend this much time in command line tools? I use iTerm. I'm on a, if you're a Windows person and you're doing PowerShell, they got Windows Terminal. There are also Windows or Mac terminals that are better than the native OS ones. So my team all has kind of a spattering of different things they like that they can come in and do their command line, whatever they need to do. So my bash terminal on a Mac is iTerm. Some people just live forever with the built-in one, so it's not a big thing. VSCode.dev, I told you about this one. Full Visual Studio in a browser. Guess what? It looks just like Visual Studio Code. It is Visual Studio Code. It's just the same code running outside of that framework that I talked about earlier, and it's running in a browser. There's a lot of Azure links in here: Pricing Calculator, Front Door, Azure Migrate, Bicep, JetBrains Writer, Kitematic, all of these things I just talked about, mapping generators. We use Identity Server quite a bit. If you're building your own login, username, password, encryption, things of that nature, I can almost with 1000% certainty tell you you're doing it wrong. You should use a third-party identity server, where there's Azure Active Directory, Identity Server. These are OAuth providers. Identity Server is a full OpenID Connect and OAuth provider for ASP.NET Core. Now they switch. These guys are commercial at this point, I believe. They've got Identity Server, and then they've got a different name thing. But there's a number of these options that you would install alongside your application, and then the login, change password flows, all of that is handled by these tools. And then your APIs authenticate via an OAuth pattern back to these tools. Lots of great stuff there. Much easier to do today than it ever was. I've written my own. Trust me, I've rolled my own as much as anyone in the past. But I do warn everyone against it anymore. Don't do anything like that. Make sure I didn't miss anything before I switch over and answer questions. And think I've covered most of these. Again, I'll, got themes, Electron, Swagger, Homebrew. There's other stuff in here. Some is Node, QuickType. A lot more in here than I talked about, but everything I talked about should be in here. I got at the bottom of this some training, the standard Pluralsight, Udemy, Udacity. If you're one that I do want to give a shout out to, we buy every new developer. We do a lot of Angular, and I don't think they're only Angular, but this random company called Ultimate Courses, they're not mainstream, but they have a really good course on Angular that we have got a ton of value out. We buy this for every new developer, and they go through this class in a couple days. And I sing their praises. I have no association with them other than a satisfied customer who's paid them a lot of money and gotten a lot of value because younger developers, newer people in the industry has gotten a lot from them. So I include them in this list. And with that, again, that list is at architectnow.net resources tab right here. It's PDF. Grab it if you want. There's my contact info. I know I didn't get through everything in that list, but I wanted to save a little time. Now that you've seen kind of the randomness of this particular session, throwing a lot at you, there's probably things that you think, man, he should have mentioned this, or shoot me that information. I would love to add it or consider it. A lot of what you saw, we didn't know about until, somebody out in the world, in our community, told us about it. So with that, are there any questions? I've ran through a lot very fast.
Hey, Kevin, this is Joe.
Sure.
Joe Kunk, how you doing?
Doing very well.
I want to ask something that my customers have asked me, and I don't have a good answer for yet. Do we have any systems that help with micropayments?
Oh, would something like a Stripe or a Braintree not be a micropayment, like a Venmo type deal? Or
Well, where you build a website and you charge them 50 cents per transaction or something, a very small amount. Where you could build a website and keep the charges low, but then the problem is most of the credit card processors have the fees that make that prohibitive.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, they do. And the only way so I don't know, number one, I guess upfront, I don't know of any that would overcome that. Those fees are always something worth considering. Even like an ACH from bank account to bank account, it's like a $2 fee. You could transfer, $10,000, but it's a $2 fee to transfer. But those fees would be prohibitive to do super small. You could do it, even a bank would do that. Even if you skipped all of these things and managed your own data center and did it yourself, you would still have to, have a bank backing or a MasterCard or, a financial institution backing, or you'd have to have enough money in the bank to cover. If you had $10 million, you could put $10 million and you could absorb most of the fees or give a backing to take the risk so they would lower their fees. There's probably ways to do it, but they're not cheap ways to do it. So a startup or a mid-sized company probably isn't built to take microtransactions without some other big financial backing, in my mind.
Okay. Well, that's what I found so far as myself, but I just want to check and see if
Yeah.
you stumbled across some piece of magic I didn't know about.
Yeah, the fees don't radically change based on what tool you use. So everyone's taken roughly the same amount. So.
Okay, we've got a couple questions in the chat, Kevin. First, where does ChatGPT and other AI technologies fit into your or your customers' current or future workflows?
I love ChatGPT, by the way. Don't get me wrong. My team also loves. Some do, some don't. But some are really taking advantage of of Git. Now I'm drawing a blank on the built-in Git flow or GitHub Lens. Somebody have to remember the name, that it scans your code and recommends source code changes, things of that nature. Some people are a little worried that it scans your code, right? And you've got proprietary code in there. But so that's an AI model that will help you code. It's built into your tools. ChatGPT isn't there yet, but tools like it are going to do that. You could paste code into ChatGPT and it'll write documentation for you. It does a lot. Now, we haven't used it for that yet, as it's relatively new. We're weeks and months since this has been made public. Microsoft has already got it coming out in Bing, and it's going to be in a lot of stuff. It's in Teams, so it's going to be in a lot more. We're using it. We are on a beta of Microsoft Teams where it ChatGPT listens to our meetings and will give us meeting notes when we're done. So there's some crazy stuff there. From a development standpoint, other than the Google or the GitHub thing, we don't use much of it. Now I will say ChatGPT's helped me write website content, marketing content, all kinds of things outside of coding. So we've used it quite a bit for just copy, right? Straight copy, but not in development that I'm aware of. No one in my company is using it for anything particular other than just playing with it, and we all talk about it a lot.
Fair enough. Okay, we've got one other one here. How do you handle sensitivity labeling? Or how do you handle data sensitivity labeling? Pardon me.
As in data sensitivity labeling, like
It says, i.e., Azure Information Protection or Microsoft Purview Information Protection.
Yeah, like when we
okay, go
generate
ahead.
emails, they have to be labeled. The artifacts inside the emails have to be labeled. The artifacts that are part of automations, the artifacts that are generated from third-party software and layered software, they all have to be labeled.
I don't honestly, you're probably outside my purview there that I know of. I don't, and I could be wrong. I'd have to go back to my teams individually. We do a lot of healthcare projects. We do a lot of higher education projects, some of our bigger stuff. If we are
Right.
doing that, we've got a tool to do that. I'm unaware of it.
Yeah, healthcare is regulated just like insurance. It has to
Yeah.
be like you just can't send out somebody's medical chart without it being labeled and tracked and scanned and all
Okay.
the other stupid things they do.
Yeah. If we're doing that, I don't know if there's a tool we're using or anything else. I am unaware of it.
I'm just wondering how you handle it from your websites. Like we handle it automatically within Microsoft products, but if you're doing it with Angular and you're generating an email and you've got some kind of a PDF inside of that email as part of your system, it has to be identified and classified, right?
I know. And again, this is just my seat at the table. We've went through a lot of HIPAA compliance auditing through third parties on various applications. Some are just internal to hospitals, some are external, some are in. We've always passed. Some of it is just common sense. And I'm just using HIPAA as an example. We don't share a lot of that data externally. So the stuff we're sharing, they're fine with. But whether we're tagging or labeling anything very specifically at an electronic level, I don't know that. We could be, and that's why they're saying, whatever you're sending might have compliance issues, but you're labeling it right and you're doing it right. I don't know that. Anybody else? Anything else?
That's it in the chat. Does anyone else have any questions?
Like I said, I shared my contact information right here. If there is questions that you think of later, an hour from now, you're like, I wish I'd asked this tomorrow, or if there's a tool or something you'd recommend, please let me know. Like I said, there's a lot I didn't get through in that document, but a lot that I did get to wasn't that I just did a lot of research or my teams found it, or a new employee came and said, hey, my last company used this. I do like giving this talk. I know it's fast paced and kind of high level and kind of random, but just seeing what's out there does, I'm hoping that it turns on a light bulb and somebody, never even thought about using a tool like that. I should consider it and it could save me time or my company time. That's the whole goal here.
Absolutely.
So, well, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me, everybody.
Yes, thank you, Kevin. I dropped a link in the chat to the survey. That survey I will leave open for 24 hours to get feedback to Kevin. I will also email that out as well if you happen to miss it flying by in the chat. And once I've got the results of that, I will aggregate that together and send you a summary, Kevin.
That sounds perfect. I appreciate it. So thanks again,
All
everyone.
right.
Thanks for listening to me ramble really fast. So,
No, thank you. Very, very, very good.
all right.
Well, thank you very much,
later.
everybody. Have a great night.
Thanks. Bye.